Now let's talk about conditionals inside of our Unity scripts. So conditionals are a way for us to test if certain things are true or not, and then react based off of the test. So the most common one is going to be an if statement, and we're going to say if, and then give it a condition. And if we meet the requirements of that condition, then we can run a block of code. And there's lots of different comparison operators, so different things that we can use for testing. So not equal to, remember that 2 equals is comparing, but 1 equals is assigning. So if you're doing any kind of comparing inside of your if statement, just make sure you use 2. 1 will give you an error in many cases. So less than, greater than, so forth. In the end, we want to test if something is the case, and if it is, do the code. If not, then don't do the code. Now, we can also catch a scenario in which none of the cases happened. So we could say, if this thing, otherwise, we'd put else and then brackets, do this. And as an addition to that, we can also say something called else if, which is we can test one case and we can say, okay, if that was not the case and this is also true, then do this. And else will just catch anything that was not caught in the previous statement. So something like this will say, if ammo is equal to 0, do this. If it wasn't, and this other thing is true, then do this. Or if none of those are true, then do this. And we can just fall down a series of tests and then catch whichever one of these was true. And lastly, a different sort of syntax to do what we just did, where we had a series of things and we wanted to catch one of those, would be called a switch statement. And it's more complex in terms of syntax, but it more clearly communicates what you're trying to do. You're just trying to test one of a series of possibilities and then running that possibility. So the syntax, again, is weird, but it is switch, and then you open up the brackets, and then you give it some kind of variable that you want to test and determine if it is one of these things. So in our case, let's say we had a strength value and we want to say, okay, what is the strength that we want to test across different cases? And so in this case, we'll pass it in a variable, or we could give it a value up here, and we'll say, if the strength is 2, then do this. If it's 1, do this. If it's 0, do this. Default inside of a switch statement just catches all other scenarios. So it's kind of like a else inside of our if else block. So we'll say, if none of these were the case, then do this. And then you want to make sure to add a break after the lines in your case. You want to add this break here so that it knows to just break out and then leave the switch statement, unless you wanted to do some more complex thing. So starting from an empty scene, again, you may want to clear it out if you've done the previous videos in the series. I'm going to create a new player. I'm going to zero out the player, just good practice. And I want to give the player something. We've been using this example pretty frequently, but I think it's applicable to games. We'll call it health. So make your script. Do not forget to attach it. Otherwise, when you run it, nothing will happen because it's not attached to anything in the scene. So we will double click and open up health. And now inside of health, let's create a value for current health. And we'll give it a default. And we need to give it a type too. I think integer makes sense for health. Okay, so let's do this. Let's create inside of awake, let's create a debug.log and say what we're actually doing. So let's say display the health. And then we're going to run a method using good practices. Remember, compartmentalize your code. We'll call display health. And then we're going to call the method right here. So inside of this method, first we'll look at the if else. So let's just do something like if current health is greater than or equal to 5, then we have perfect health. Otherwise, which is going to be else, right? If we have anything other than 5 or greater, well, we're not looking too good. Okay, and then lastly, because we may want the designer to control this, we're gonna do a serialized field, just as a reminder that we can do this. So this is taking our private variable, current health, and exposing it in the inspector. And we're gonna give it a value, and if the value is 5 or greater, then it should print this. And if it is anything other than 5 or greater, right, or else, it should print this. Let that compile, and then hit play. You go to your console, you'll see display the health, and then you will see the appropriate amount. Now this is because our current health is 5. Let's change it to 3. Hit play. You'll see now it's hitting the else block. So now it's hitting not looking great because our current value is not greater than or equal to 5. And just to test it, let's put in 100, 1000 even. Okay, so we're better than 5, so we're good. Save. Now let's do another thing. I actually don't like that we're putting this magic number down here, which we mentioned before. So let's make a max value. We'll say int max health equals 10. And we're going to replace this and say if current health is greater than or equal than the max, so we're getting rid of our magic number there, defining everything at the top. Now let's try and catch the scenario in which we have 0 health. So in this case, I'm going to do else if this will test, and if it's, so let's say we have 0, it'll look and say, okay, is 0 greater than or equal to 10? No, it's not. So then we will say else if current health is equal to 0. So if we have 0 health, well, we're dead, right? We don't have any health. Otherwise, not looking great. Now keep in mind here, we're defaulting our current health to 5 now, and we're saying if 5 is greater than or equal to 10, which it is not. So I'm going to change this to remind you of a common Unity problem. So we're defaulting to 10 and 10. And we're going to catch the scenario. So if it's greater than or equal to max, then we got great health. If it's 0, we have no health. Otherwise, we're somewhere in the middle. If we save, we'll come back. Remember that the inspector value will always default to whatever we put in here, not into what we changed it over here. So just be aware of that. Over here, I want to put in some value. I can put in any value I want. In this case, I'm just going to put it at the default. Save, hit play. Okay, so perfection. We'll put in 5. Not looking great. And then we'll make sure that we can catch our scenario to 0. Great. Okay, so this is how you can use else and if else.